Welcome back to the MMA Creators Podcast, episode Nungdoe Hot. That is 106. And this week, you're of course joined by myself, Casuals Corner, and Leo Cooper MMA. And we've got a few things to break down. We've got UFC316, we've got Joaquin Buckley and Kamaru Usman, and the general chatter that goes into our lives on a week-to-week basis. Leo Cooper, how was the weekend for you?
Tough, if I'm being real. I think as I maybe get older, I think it might be. I don't know what the cause is, but I'm not saying I'm reaching unk status. Let's be real. I'm only 23, but I swear I can't stay up for these pay-per-views as easy as I used to be able to. I don't know why that is. Maybe I'm just drinking less caffeine and I'm just less accustomed anymore. But man, let's not sit here and say that UFC 316 was a barn burner showcase of the peak of MMA. It wasn't a terrible card by any means, but I feel like I should have fared better in terms of staying up for it as a UK fan, even with a bit of caffeine down me. But it was tough. It was tough. But worth staying up for, I'd say. You know, it wasn't the most exciting thing ever, but we got some exciting performances. Let's not get it twisted. Or impressive is probably the word to use. And I think the only person, or rather, should I say, the first person who fits that bill is, of course, one half of the main event, Merab defending his bantamweight title, and now very much in the conversation. Or that's not even doing it justice. I think pretty much cementing himself in a lot of ways as the greatest bantamweight of all time. I don't think that's too much of a hot take anymore. I think before this fight it was an argument, but with a statement win like that against Sean O'Malley, even better than the last time. And if you look at his resume, I looked at it yesterday. Yes, he's only got 2 title defenses, which is impressive in its own right. But the amount of like names, the amount of scalps he's got on that list, on that current running streak he's on, is truly phenomenal. And I think, you know, I got no qualms with putting him as the best ever in that division, which is, you know, just speaks to how far he's come over the last few years. Phenomenal performance. And it was one of those where if you looked at the fight, Sean O'Malley had clearly done his homework with Tim Watch. They clearly improved. They were ready in terms of the takedown defense. He fared okay. But Merab had he'd gone 2 steps further. And that's the difference. He's just 2 steps further than everyone else he faces. And yeah, thoroughly impressed. Beautiful choke. It was like he tried for an anaconda, I believe. It might have been a dust. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it sort of rolled it over into a north-south choke, and that was it. It was just elementary. Seriously impressive. And even on the feet as well, with the hands, opening up with those left rights, really tagging Sean, you know, far more than I thought he would in those pocket exchanges, which when we discussed was probably his weakness. But he had success there. So yeah, I mean, I have no bad things to say about Merab really in terms of his performance. And if I did, I'd be nitpicking and being disingenuous. But what were your thoughts?
I'll come on to how I actually think he can be beaten in a second, but I need to preface that all by saying it's almost impossible at the moment to beat him because, like you said, he is actually just getting better. He's actually just leveling up. Usually he would use those sort of front headlock positions as a way to either break his opponent down or just to tire them out and just wear some weight on them. And then he'd usually disengage and then look to go back to the takedown. But now the details that he's adding on are firstly damage in these positions. So there's not a lot of stale positions with Merab anymore, even though the strikes were a little bit smaller. He was still going knees to the body, he was going knees to the thigh, slightly more active than he was previously. And then second to that, he's showing submission offense. Again, in that front headlock position, he threatened it early in the fight. And then, of course, we saw how it ended as well. So he's actually adding really impressive and important wrinkles to his game, because now you actually have to be fearful of these positions because he can finish it. Sometimes people have been comfortable facing Merab. Even though they've been uncomfortable, they've been more comfortable in the grappling, knowing that the submission threat's not so much there. And then they can make a few holes in the way that they get back to their feet because they know he's not so much of a hunter from those positions. So firstly, I just need to say the company he now keeps are the Anderson Silvas, the George St. Pierres, the Khabibs, all of these ridiculous statures in mixed martial arts.
That's a claim.
It's not a claim. It's objective because they're the stats that he's keeping. Last fight, he just passed George St. Pierre for the most takedowns ever. So I'm not telling you he's as good as X or he's as good as Y. I'm just telling you when you speak about Merab Dvalishvili, you must keep him in a certain conversation because the statistics prove it. George St. Pierre's takedown record, the previous fight, and now he becomes one of only 5, I believe, fighters in the UFC to have a winning streak of 13. Again, the Anderson Silvas, the Nurmagomedovs, the George St. Pierre's, they're the names that are now in the conversation. And when you look at the bantamweight division, there is no question that he is the greatest. When you look at the resume, when you look at the names that he's ticked off, and when you look at the amount of champions that he has beaten. So
crazy.
To round off the pros, I just always knew he was good, right? That's not really an insightful take. I always knew he had a fantastic resume. I always knew he could beat the likes of Sean and even Umar. Did I think that Sean was going to come out and have his moment? Yeah, I did, actually. Did I think he was the more skillful over 10 fights? No, I didn't. But I look at him now as just this man that is completely feared, not just from his own game, but even the smaller details, like the team behind him. You look at him when he's getting ready for the fight. You look over his shoulder, and this is a small detail, but one I did want to bring up. I love Tim Welch and the team in Arizona and that whole setup that they've got going on. I've followed that journey very closely ever since I first came into the sport. But when you look over his shoulder and you see Sean's dad, you see Tim Welch, who, again, is accomplished in the sport and has learned from some of the best, but I'm just painting the picture. And then you see the rest of his corner team. And they were all kind of by the cage, less confident with the setting. They hadn't been there as many times. They wasn't over the cage with their head over. And then you look on the flip side and you've got John Wood, Ray Longo, and Aljamain Sterling all completely together, hanging over the cage, standing over it. And you just think, look at the man they've got in front of them. They've got this flipping Viking in front of them. So you're not just coming up against... You're not coming up against the machine. You're coming up against the machine. Quite literally, everything that goes into it, right? Everything that goes into it. So I know I went off on a tangent there, but the way that I'll round this conversation of Merab up is when I evaluated the fight with him and Sean. Of course, I thought Sean could have success on the feet, and I did think he could have that moment. I knew it was a smaller probability, but I knew he could do it. But there was one thing about Sean O'Malley's game which worried me, and this is the biggest difference between him and Corey Sandhagen. Now, do you remember, I'll throw this over to you, do you remember when, a few months ago, I said, I think there's going to be a new meta in the sport of MMA, and I think there's going to be a new wave of style of fighters? Do you remember? When I said that.
But I think I almost half do, because I think I know what you're referring to, in a sense that, are you referring to the sort of pressure fighter style of, I don't want to call it like a lesser technique, but a good example of it was another man on that card, and his name is slipping my mind, but the man who fought Chaos Williams, in very similar vein to how Merab fights, in the sense that, I mean, he openly admitted he's the least technical fighter in the UFC, and he doesn't care, and he just comes in there and just drives you to the fence and grinds you down in the exact same way that Merab does, with slightly different nuances. And I'm assuming that's the sort of archetype of fighter you're referring to. Though I could be wrong. You're shaking your head.
It's not. What you're thinking of, which I mentioned a while ago, which you're 100% bang on, and I still do believe, is there's a lot of areas I think that people are going to exploit more than they do now, which is exactly what you said, right? Positions against the cage, clinches against the cage, knees, elbows, punches, underhooks to elbows, exit high kicks, exit knee off the ground. A lot of these areas where people don't capitalize at the moment, and in training sessions, standing next to Ash Grimshaw flipping every week, he drives them home. But so partly yes, but that's not what I was referring to. I was referring to, when I mentioned previously, that very, very dangerous offensive jiu-jitsu players who can wrestle, and of course who are then pair decent enough striking on it, are going to be a real problem. And the reason I said that before, and I'll say that again, is because that is what can truly, truly mitigate the meta of dominant wrestling, which came into MMA, which is slowly phasing out. And what I mean by that is, if you go back to watch Davison Figueiredo versus Corey Sandhagen, this is exactly what I mean by it. Instead of Corey Sandhagen getting taken down and then working back to his feet with traditional get-ups like wrestle-ups, or even just shrimping, or even just sweeps, there's more of an emphasis on aggressive jiu-jitsu where it creates some variety of panic to either chase the submission or just to get back exposure or to sweep and then stand up. That's what actually tore Figgy's knee, and that's what allowed him actually to get out from bottom. Sean O'Malley, sorry, did none of that. Did none of that. Now, you can work traditional get-ups back to your feet, but that's essentially what caused him an issue, right? He went to wrestle up again, and then that's where he left his head on that front headlock position and then got wrapped up. Whereas you've got someone like Corey Sandhagen who inverts straight away and is looking for legs, even if it's just a sweep. That's where I think they're going to close the hole with this wrestling, where people are a lot more comfortable. Okay, I'm going to not want to get taken down, but I'm going to accept that I'm going to get taken down, and I'm going to be able to throw something up. Because I said this to you before, you're just not getting triangle and armbar submissions at the highest level. Really, you just don't. Because, okay, there's some outliers, some absolute outliers, but it doesn't happen against the champions. It just doesn't, because you have to make a mistake, like usually a glaring mistake, for that to happen, and they don't usually make those mistakes. So if you're going to accept the takedown but be off your back and look for triangles and arm bars, you're already losing, especially if you're not looking to create separation and sweep. Sean O'Malley didn't do enough good enough job, in my opinion, off of his back, and didn't have enough tricks to essentially get back to his feet. So sorry I went off on a tangent, but I'll throw it back over to you now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much to say on it. It's just a phenomenal performance. And as you said, adding that submission game in, which is probably the one area in terms of an offensive side of things that Merab really lacked, was that submission threat. I think in a lot of ways it was that absence over his last few fights that probably caused Sean to make that mistake, because I think he probably would have the assumption, leaving his neck out there, that Merab would have just laid on top of him, tried to drain him a little bit more, because that's what they come to expect from the man. So to see that front head suddenly latch up that front headlock and look for that anaconda, again, I cannot remember if it was an anaconda or a Dar's attempt off the top of my head. One of the two, because they're very similar. But I mean, as you said, the evolution, and I don't know how old he is now off the top of my head, but still plenty of time left in the game to chart a legacy. And I just
Sam Sipsey.
What's that from in English?
34.
34, is he? 34. Okay, maybe not then. I mean, still, does it look like anyone's going to beat him? You tell me. You said there's a weakness for him, right? There's a way to beat him in that archetype of fighter. I'm assuming that's what you were referring to. But name me a fighter in that division right now who's doing that, or who has a chance of beating the man in any capacity. Because at the moment, I just don't see it. And I understand it's mixed martial arts, and there is just an intangible element of uncertainty. This is what makes this sport exciting. But if you're asking me in that top 10, top 15, who? I'm not seeing it. I really am not.
I think for now, the person who has the best chance is Corey Sandhagen, for the reasons that I explained. Because if you go back and look throughout his career, every time that someone has highlighted a hole in his game, or even that he's just had a fight that he's lost, or a fight that didn't propose some issues, he's gone away and fixed them. So you look at him now, he can offensively grapple, and he will show that to anyone and everyone, which everyone should do. If you're coming up against a grappler, a superior grappler to yourself, and you're a striker, you still should be showing level changes. That is the case for everyone. And Corey Sandhagen will be doing that. So he can show offensively takedowns on Merab. Now, I don't think he's going to take him down, because Merab's takedown defense is lights out. But when he does get taken down, not if, when, he has legitimate danger on the ground. And then you look over to his corner, and who's in his corner? Ryan Hall. Okay, so one of the best, the very, 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 very best systems and minds in the game when it comes to the leg entanglements. And that's how we're now seeing Corey actually have success in his grappling exchanges. And if you go back and watch the fight with TJ, it actually happened then, and he actually shredded TJ's knee. Somehow he managed to stay in the fight and win. But this is what Corey Sandhagen does, which has a real danger element to Merab, because he will go for the takedowns, and Corey Sandhagen won't be fearful of them, because he knows that he'll be able to, or at least he'll think he'll be able to show danger, sweep, and stand up, and he will get back to his feet. I love Sean. He there was just something about the body language and something about the energy of that fight where he just...
It's after that first takedown. I think it probably just comes back to that first fight, right? Sorry to just interject, but it's like that the demoralizing, you know, effect that probably has on him to say, we've done all this work, we put in the hours, we know we can match up with this guy, and the same outcome is just approaching rapidly. The effect that has must be instrumental to that, in my opinion.
But that is where I would like to know, in the camp of Sean, was he looking to mitigate the takedown, or was he looking to progress after getting taken down? And that is a completely different conversation and a completely different way that you build your camp. Because in my opinion, from what I've heard and observed, almost the worst thing to do against such a phenomenal takedown artist is to have it fixated in your mind to not get taken down. And he's had that a couple of times with Aljo, because of obviously the rib injury as well. He had to just take down Muslava, right? So that was in his head. And then he had it with Merab the first time. So now I'm wondering, was the emphasis on not getting taken down, or was the emphasis on progressing after not getting taken down? Because really in that camp, he should have actually spent more time working from positions from his back than he should have done the takedown. Because realistically, mitigating the takedown is going to come to, of course, knowing different things to do, but there's only so much you're going to learn there. So it's going to be a case of getting sharp in those positions and getting your distance in right, which of course he's good at doing. But then, in my opinion, it should actually be spent mostly on your back. Right, okay, you're now on your back, right? Worst case scenario, how do we progress now? Can we invert? Can we sweep? Can we stand up? Can we get butterflies? Can we, what are we doing to get past this position?
I think in that regard, in terms of evolving and progressing from the positions of your back, I think what we need to see more of, and I refer to a specific fight here because I think it's the best example of it, is remembering that damage is actually the most important factor, and fights can be still, or rounds, should I say, can still be won from those positions. And the example I'm using there publicly, I feel like you might know where I'm going with this, is Michael Bisping, George St. Pierre. And I know that's a fight that the former lost, right? No, but you didn't know. But elbows on the bottom is what I'm saying. Michael Bisping won the second round in that fight and bloodied the hell out of George St. Pierre off of his back the entire time because he was throwing up elbows, being a nuisance, and causing a lot of damage. That's something I just don't feel like we see a lot of at all. And again, it's easy to say as us coming as literal armchair analysts, but it's the same way we talk about elbows in a normal setting, like at the exit of a clinch or in just general striking range. We don't see a lot of it at all. And it still blows my mind, but more specifically ones off your back. That's something I'd like to see fighters apply a lot more. Because as you say, the general rule of thumb here is to get up, right? That's like the paramount rule number one for most strikers is ignore, stop being content off your back, get up. But there are routes to victory another way, right? So that's something I'd like to see more. Maybe Sean could have had some success there if he threw up some elbows. I don't know. Maybe, but I doubt it would have been enough per se, because I think Merab is just too good in every facet. But it's something to ponder about, right?
It's just frustrating, right? It's frustrating because there's such a standard set menu to anti-grapple. There really is. And depending on who you are, you're probably going to do the set menu in a different order. But it's almost always the same. Look to submit. If one or two submission attempts aren't there, well, firstly, actually, hit the ground, look to get back up. Because as soon as you hit the ground, that's the best time to get back up, right? But where there's still some element of chaos, that's the best time to progress, where the position hasn't been settled. So before it's even settled, you should look to be getting up. If it has settled, then for the most part, you're going to be looking for a submission or two. If that's not there, then you're going to look to sweep. If you can't look to sweep, you just need to look to stand up. You need to look to get separation in however you can. And then going on to what you said, then that's probably, okay, last case scenario, you wouldn't want to be doing this early, in my opinion. You'd want to look to get back to your feet. But if it was worst case scenario, okay, now can we look to, if you're going to close the guard, which is the most frustrating thing to ever watch in MMA, ever. And I don't mean, okay, crazy fight, get 5 seconds. I mean, you've been taken down in the first 1.5 minutes of the fight, and then you close your guard and you're holding your opponent's head so he can't get posture and land elbows. I'm like, What are we doing here? What are we doing? This is the highest level of MMA
I never do
and
that
conditioning.
ever in jiu-jitsu, just for the record. I never close my guard. Well, maybe a little bit if I'm trying to build my get to the hips, but you know, I keep it open. I'm being active, right? And I know MMA is a different scenario, as I'm sure you're about to say, like in terms of you worry about the strikes, but still, I think that's the philosophy I think everyone should adopt, as you're saying.
Yeah, it should almost never be closed. And I understand it's scary when you've got someone on top of you and they're landing elbows. You're like, okay, can I stop this for a second? I get that. But the best way to stop him landing elbows is getting back to your feet, and you can't do it closed guard. So again, I'm just highlighting things that is frustrating as a fan, but then what I hear coaches say, what I hear the commentary say. If the best person on commentary ever about getting back to their feet is Bisping. If you ever watch a fight with Bisping, he is fantastic at it himself, but then he hates it when it happens in the cage. So the last point to that is on the set menu, it would then probably go what you said at the end. Right, okay, let me try and open him up. Let me try and create some chaos with my own strikes if I can. You should be a threat. In an ideal world of this game that we have as MMA, you should be able to be threatening anywhere. You're not going to be always going to be an Islam in the takedowns and a Charles off your back and a flipping GSP on the jab. No, that's not always possible. But you need to have some element of danger everywhere. So you can't let your opponent settle. As soon as they settle, that's when they're just going to get to what they're best at. And I don't think Corey Sandhagen is going to let Merab settle, because he's got attacks out of southpaw with punches and kicks, knees if you come too far at the middle. He's got decent enough boxing. He's got submission offense. He's got elbows. Like, he will chuck it all together. So I do think he's the most dangerous. Yeah, for sure.
That's a very good point you bring up, actually. I think the idea of being a Swiss Army knife almost in terms of the context of MMA, and it's something I can actually relate to in jiu-jitsu. In terms of some of the guys I roll with, there's a dude, shout out Linus. This guy, he's a like much heavier guy than me, and I don't have a problem with that. Obviously, it's going to be a bit of an uphill challenge, just naturally for me, right? But that's not what makes him so good. Whenever I roll with him, what makes him so good is that he's always asking questions. He is going at a phenomenal pace. He can set a phenomenal pace and constantly keep me guessing. So by the time I figured out one puzzle, he's moved on to the second, third, and fourth, and that's what makes the high level, like the higher level trainers, so good at what they do, is because, and that goes for MMA as well, of course, just to bring it back, is they have so many different areas where they can keep you guessing. And Corey Sandhagen is a perfect example of that. And that might be, as you say, the route to victory against Merab, something unorthodox that he doesn't expect, like a throwing up a heel hook attempt or something. Flying knees, as of course he's known for. I think to that one against Frankie Edgar, it's one of my favorite finishes in recent memory. There's so many good options for him. So yeah, as I said earlier, if there is a man to beat him, I'm not sure if Corey Sandhagen is the one to do it, but he might have the best chance out of that top 10, top 15.
The last thing I'll say on this, and as a bit of a side tangent, but we can move on after it, is I have said this a million times before as well, but also it's almost impossible to, well, unless you're Merab, funnily enough, but it's almost impossible to go out there and just throw any strike you want and constant offense, and you're going to get tired, right? It's very tiring to do that. But there's also a lot of techniques that don't get used, which we've mentioned throughout this, that have very, 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 very low output on the energy front, but have maximal upside. If you're talking about having an overhook situation against the cage and you're pummeling for position and now you've got a slightly more dominant position, one very, very small, well-placed elbow on that free right side may not cause a ton of damage, but may just cut open an eyebrow, to which now the opponent, in the best case scenario, the fight gets stopped. In maybe a not worst case scenario, they just have a gash across their eye, which is now running into their eye, and their depth perception is completely off, and they can only see out of one visible eye. Now, every time you land your jab, boom, or you land your right hand, they can't actually see or slip it because they can't flip and see it. So it's about doing the least to get the most in a weird way. But I think the person that was doing the least on Saturday night seemed to be Juliana Pena. So let's get into that one, because
we got the elephant in the room after the other day's episode.
I was going to be all the way right or wrong on this, and I still stand by everything that I said, by the way, 100%. But
it was always a case of whether she got out of those first.
That weren't
rounds.
A good showing.
No, it wasn't.
That weren't a good showing.
The segue I was going to use was, speaking of people who couldn't get up off the ground. Juliana Pena was where I was going to go, and there's no shame in that at all when you're coming against, someone with the esteemed grappling pedigree of Kayla Harrison, who, credit to her, didn't seem to be phased by that weight cut, nor the magnitude of the moment in the slightest. So, I mean, what can you say besides hats off to her? I mean, that Kimura, there's very few things in MMA that make me wince. Stuff like arm bars and Kimuras when they're absolutely ripped. I think back to Charles Oliveira versus Tony Ferguson is probably the most uncomfortable one. And to talk about arm bars, but that Kimura, I mean, you saw how quickly Juliana Pena tapped, and that's a woman who, as we discussed the other day, is tenacious, will fight to the end, will bring the dog out of you, and won't quit. She was tapping very, very quickly, despite the fact there was 7 seconds left in that round. So that just shows you how strong that technique was applied by Kayla Harrison, and of course it was Anu that we heard on Saturday night. I mean, yeah, very, very impressed. Where she goes from here, I don't know. Sustaining that weight cut, of course, she will get more comfortable, but she will get older, and that weight cut does get a little bit harder. So there is a lot of questions around making championship weight every time she fights now. But, I think she's not here for a long time. She's here for a good time in this sport. She's legacy chasing. That's what she's always done within the realms of combat sports. And now she's reached the top of the mountain. I mean, I think the only question is what's next for her. And of course, with that call out and the in the cage entrance, Amanda Nunes' return seems like the logical pick. I don't know how I see that fight playing out, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
It's such a strongman submission at Kimura. It makes me think of the Francis Ngannou Kimura, if you've seen that one.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I'm glad you bring that up. As I say, I'm working on the video on him, looking through all of his fights. I think it was his debut? A UFC debut? One of his earlier fights in the UFC, he ripped the Kimura, I believe. I could be wrong, but earlier on in his career, for sure. Yeah, he just absolutely just launches it past the shoulder. It's, uncomfortable. My biggest Achilles heel in jiu-jitsu, well, more Americanas, but it's very similar technique in that regard. Not fun to deal with, I have to say.
There's not always a bunch of submissions in jiu-jitsu which really favors someone just being brutally strong. And of course you need application first and foremost, but that is a position that you can just horsepower through. And if you can horsepower through, it is seriously dangerous. You can't really do it with things like rear naked chokes and things like that. You need the application to be very, very, very good. Otherwise you're just going to gash your arms out. But if you've got a good bite on a Kimura and you can just flip and power someone, and there was a big discrepancy in, so I didn't, it sounds stupid thinking back to it, but I didn't think the size discrepancy was going to be that much. I knew it was going to be fair, but I didn't think it was going to be that much. Because Juliana Pena is always, she's lean. She's not the biggest, but she's never too undersized. Even against Amanda Nunes, she didn't look tiny. So I didn't quite expect that size difference. But yeah, I think that's how it should have went, really, right?
Yeah,
that's how it should have went.
Predicted it to be.
Yeah.
So. But again, no shame in shooting, right?
No, but and also it's there's odds for a reason, right? And odds are basically percentages. It's probability saying, right, this amount of times out of 10, this is how it's going to play out. And sometimes you can agree with the odds and disagree with them drastically as well, because you can agree with where they're at, but disagree with which time you think this is going to be. And I just, again, all on the weight cut, I couldn't see a world in where, again, she would be healthy and competitive with anyone, with a plastic bag, to be perfectly fair, just because of how drastic it is. And I keep going on about it, but especially at a women's low weight class, it's just, and the reason I say women's is because naturally women have a higher body fat percentage than men. So to get to almost nothing in regards to body fat percentage is even harder for women. Biologically is even more difficult, right? So there's just so many obstacles that she overcome. And she said something in the post-fight press conference, which I just wanted to bring up because it really stuck with me. And I know a lot of people are religious often when they go on the mic and they say glory to God, and that's nothing new. But there was asked about the weight cut, and she said, how do you manage it? And how do you get that last pound? And she just said, the last pound is all down to God. And I know a lot of times you hear things like that and it kind of just falls by the wayside, but that one hit me because honestly it is like there's nothing else but just this higher power taking that off of her 100%. Because you look at your average fighter just on any card just trying to make that last pound when it's not really their weight class is difficult. And then you look at her situation and everything she does. A lot of people are lazy in the build up and then they need to kind of rush the weight cut a little bit
She is
more
not.
because they haven't been that disciplined. But she's disciplined the entire time, so she's at basically all she can give anyway. And then the weight cut is just everything. And then there's this just 1 pound left, and it just hangs there, and you just can't scratch it off. But there's a higher power looking over her, and she now becomes one of the most impressive combat athletes of all time, male or female, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, conquered pretty much every mountain, right, that she's been in. I believe in every combat sports realm she's entered, right? PFL champ, now UFC champ, Olympic champion as well. I mean, I guess, well, I mean, does that surpass Henry Cejudo? In terms of, we're talking about the realm of combat sports? I don't know. Off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure. But regardless, it's an impressive performance, not just to enter the UFC and have success, but to do it and win a UFC title in the process, because very, very few fighters have done that. And I am curious what you are attaching to your microphone there. Some sort of apparatus. Please do tell. What is that?
It's
about?
just charging. It's
charging.
just charging.
Are you going to have to hold that?
Looks like it, doesn't it?
We do.
It looks like it, doesn't it? Does she surpass Henry Cejudo? I don't think.
That is also a double.
I'm not too sure, right?
To be fair.
Yeah, but then you could say the same for her, and you could say, well,
yeah, true.
Which one's more impressive, right? That's a question. Which one's more impressive? Is it more impressive going to the UFC and going up a weight class and winning one fight to make yourself double champ? Or is it going through the whole Olympic process again and winning gold? I would probably argue 2 Olympic golds is actually more impressive. I don't really know. I haven't really thought about it a lot. Yeah.
Shit.
But just because of the process of it, right? Because if you look at being a double champ in the UFC, it's incredible feat. I'm not saying that's not. And obviously we're just nitpicking on some of the highest achievements of sport. So
it's circumstance, right? You know, it's circumstance
of course,
more than anything. Obviously you have to get over the line, but stars have got to align for that.
You get one, for the most part. Henry Cejudo gets one fight, right, on one date, and he has to go and show up and beat the better man at 135 to get the 2 belts. Not taking anything away from that, but with Olympics, you have to go through a 4-year process again. Not even competing, just mentally going through the process. Physically, your body's just getting torn down over that time, and then you have to go out and compete in a tournament structure. Go all the way to the final, and then win the actual final itself. So, I don't know. I think 2 Olympic golds is probably more important.
Yeah, you know what,
impressive,
I might
to be
actually
fair.
With you. I mean, to be fair, I will to counter that. You can talk about the side defenses of Henry Cejudo, but again, apples and oranges. We can go back and forth on that. Now, we did say just before we punch record, we were going to break down a little bit of the Usman versus Buckley card. But to be honest with you, I'm not. You know, I'm excited for it, but I'm not. I feel like we should move past that. I am curious because I don't think we touched on it too much the other day.
Okay.
What's just been going on in your career life? What's been happening? Obviously, you have got a toe wrestling call after this recording of the podcast. So obviously that's been involved with your life. But I'm stumbling over my words here. But what we have been talking, you know, over the last couple of weeks in terms of building up the Patreon, you're fully on board with that. Has there been any more developments in that regard? It sounds like there has.
Yeah, that has. I thought we were going to touch on a couple of more from the 316.
Well, I mean, we
can. I feel like we've got 1 or 2 to bring up. Not in too much depth, but we'll go into the
I think I know where you're going to go
in a second. I got messaged a while ago from... it's going to annoy me that I can't remember the fella's name on Instagram. But long story short, he has created a MMA outlet, is what it's called. He's created a week-to-week picks. And he said to me, oh, can you be in this creator league? I was like, sure, just need to send over your picks. I was like, fine, right. It's relatively low commitment, right? So I said, no problem. And he's always a good supporter of mine. So I was like, no issues at all. I messaged him the day before Saturday, literally the night before. I'd watched a 30-second clip on Twitter of just Patchy Mix's last fight, to be honest. And I'd seen his fights as well. I watched a couple live. It's not even that, I was just highlight watching. But I watched this one. I messaged him and I said, Batista decision, change my pick immediately. Change it immediately. And as soon as the first punch got thrown, I thought, oh, okay, I've already won this bet. I know 100% I've won this. Because he cannot cannot fight on the back foot when he's under pressure, and he does not move his head, and that isn't new. Just isn't new. So I knew how good Batista in regards to fundamental boxing, kickboxing, kicks well, punches well, very defensively sound, and I just knew it was going to be easy pickings on the feet. And oh my goodness, that was a breeze.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, he just didn't offer anything. And I saw a lot of debate on this on my stream as well. But I mean, do you know what I mean, though? It was weird. Again, it was almost so strange that, again, some people made the argument in my chat, and I somewhat subscribed to this, that maybe he just felt the pressure of the moment. You know, some fighters do, some fighters don't. Maybe he did. But equally, as you said, there was somewhat of a premonition, right? The tape study showed no severe lack of head movement, especially moving backwards. And it just allowed Batista to just control the fight. I mean, that's the reality. But you only have 15 minutes. It's not a long time. And because we're scoring by a round basis, if you're 10 minutes down, that's it. That's a wrap. You got to go for a finish. So it's like, it doesn't take a lot for a fight to suddenly just slip out of your hands. And that's very much what happened to Patchy Mix. And he just didn't seem to wake up, really. You know, he landed like a decent shot in the last round or something like that. And as if it was some sort of signifier. But you know what I mean? Just disappointing and just outright strange, especially when you talk about the hype. Maybe he was a victim of that to an extent, you know, coming from Bellator and his so much success over there. Perhaps a victim of that, of his own success. But you would expect more, wouldn't you? You know, a better showing. There's very few fighters, actually. I saw a good statistic on it. And there's very few fighters who have come from Bellator and have actually maintained positive records. I believe, if this stat was correct, the only one or two are Alexander Volkov and Eddie Alvarez, which is quite crazy to say, isn't it? When you think about the amount of fighters who over the years who have come from that promotion and fought in the UFC, pretty damning statistic.
A couple of things on that though. Firstly, he has only fought 5-round fights for a good few years, so I did think his pacing was just to be a little bit not adjusted to that. True. He was taking short notice. I'll give him that. 3 weeks, like, fair enough. Okay. These are all relevant. So these are all relevant points, but that doesn't change your skill set at all. And the way that he fought and where he lost, they were holes that were in earlier fights. So I agree with you in regards to UFC jitters do exist. They are real. And it is a big, bright light on your face. You go and out there. I know this sounds stupid at some time. I don't think people realize just how bright those lights are. Quite literally, how bright they are. It's like ridiculous, right? And when you go in the cage, it's such a big cage and the lights are so incredibly just centered onto you, boom, and everything's so dark and all you can see is TV crews. And that's all that you can see. So the pressure is immense.
For those who don't know, by the way, this is from first-hand experience of you being in Lonnie Kavanagh's corner. So, you know, this is actual truth here.
Yeah, that's 100%. Mostly everything I say is either from other people's experiences or from my own experiences. And that's my own experience of going to step on that canvas and looking around and feeling what that's like. Now, obviously, I can't speak to that as a fighter, but I can hear what other people say and then combine that with my own experiences. So I can paint a pretty good picture, I would say. But my point to that was I would allow that to be a more relevant reason for his loss if he didn't look exactly how he'd look in the sort of last fight, right? It didn't really look too dissimilar. So it wasn't an out of the ordinary type of performance at all, really, for Patchy Mix. So yeah, and the last thing I'll say on the Bellator thing is you're right about the statistics, but also, in all fairness, how many of those have come over in their prime? You know,
good point.
They're coming over once their name has been built and their brand is there. The UFC get them basically pennies on the dollar, and then they try and squeeze the last few fights out of their brand and look to take everything that they can out of that. So I don't think you're getting Eddie Alvarez, Michael Chandler. I don't think you're getting Michael Venom Page. I don't think you're getting Patchy Mix. I don't think you're getting these people in the prime point of their career. You're getting them in the twilight end of their career. So I don't always feel like it's a very fair comparison, just
that's actually
going between them.
Yeah, and you said there was one more other fight, give or take, you wanted to bring up? Or no dice?
Kevin Holland did what I thought he was going to do. I thought that was pretty impressive in regards to Yeah, I always say that he doesn't really get the appreciation he deserves on his jiu-jitsu. Once again, shows that. Honestly, could be a problem for anyone at 170. I've said that since he moved over, and he's slyly working in the background. He slyly is. He's just, and it seems like he's got a bit more of a chip on his shoulder than ever
I think it
before.
does
Even when
seem
I
like
saw
that,
him in
right?
London, he just,
Yeah.
mate, he seemed very, I don't know, he just seemed off. He just seems very off these days. Chip on his shoulder, kind of bit dismissive to everything, and he seems like he's just working in the shadows. And you know what? As a fan, I don't love the arc in regards to resonating with a fighter, but in regards to his actual career, pretty exciting. So, yeah, I think there's big fights on the horizon. I like the Colby fight. I like
Yeah,
that
I like
a
that a
lot,
lot.
actually. Yeah, what do you think about that?
Why not, right? I mean, I think it's pretty fitting considering Kevin Holland in his
Or
post-fight interview
Prates?
said, "Oh yeah." I mean, I don't even know if Holland would take that, and the reason I say it is because in his post-fight press conference, he just openly stated in the most Kevin Holland way possible that he doesn't want all these new hot up-and-comers. Give me the old men, give me the easy fights, give me the washed-up veterans. And it might sound harsh, but I think it's true that Colby Covington fits that bill to an absolute T. So if we're talking about fights to make, him versus the Trailblazer, I actually like a lot, as you were saying. I think that's a fun one, and I actually think it's one Kevin Holland can win. I think he does win it, actually,
Yeah.
now I say it.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's one that he can flip and win. 100%. Going back to the original point that you made about the Patreon, have there been any developments with that? Oh, well, certainly has been some developments with that. I've spent a large portion of my weekend actually working out the tier structures, working out the product offering, what I'm
So
going
I've
to
been doing.
include in each one, tidying it all up, actually creating the profile. As you know, it's actually can take a little while, and then just slowly integrating all of those links throughout my ecosystem. I realize now my ecosystem is quite dense, and it actually takes a while to make
Yeah.
one small adjustment throughout them, right? So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all of the descriptions, different
I think
links and
that might
whatnot.
be the
So
advantage I have over
websites,
you. There's not a lot. Mine's very much focused and funneled
yeah,
into one platform. Yeah.
yeah. Again, everything has its pros and cons, right? And there's a tremendous amount of benefits to that as well. Ones that we've spoke about many times. So yeah, that's what I did this weekend. Really, is just kind of found what I'm going to offer in each tier, and then also just played out, right, how can I integrate? Firstly, can I answer the question, is it valuable? Are all of these just valuable? And they're not just looking to be cash grabs. They're looking to actually provide value, provide insight, and give something to the consumer, and in turn get the money to then make that offering actually better. And I answered those questions for myself and said yes. So now it's just like, right, how can I actually integrate these into my content? Where can I use call to actions? Where can I ask people to be a part of this? Because even just for some people, them having their names in credits at the end of the GBTV episodes is pretty cool, right? And
Yeah.
for $5 a month and going in credits and whatnot, even that in itself with no other offering is kind of pretty sweet when you think about that just being one thing. I'll say, right, and I'll throw it over to you. The way I asked myself this question is when I was looking at them originally, I was thinking, imagine how many monthly things people sign up to these days with streaming services and bills and everything. And you look at those numbers sometimes, even if it's £7, £25, £50, whatever it may be, and you think, it's quite a lot. But then you're looking at that in isolation, right? As just a one fixed price, and then you tally it up over a year and you say, right, it's this much. If you extrapolate that and think, okay, if I was to just be in a pub and one of my followers saw me and they said, Will, I've been following you for years, like absolutely love your content, like, let me just buy you a pint, right? Which are things that could very easily happen, right? Just a drink, just one drink. Like, I love that GBTV episode you did, that I knew the person who was on that, so yeah, like, love to buy you a drink, one drink. £7.50 in today's economy. So now
I was about to make a
asking,
joke, but it was less than what you're saying. Blimey. Is that how much it costs
yeah,
around you?
well,
fucking hell. I mean, I know you're not big on drinking
not
that much anyway.
not always, but yeah, if I went into London and bought a pint in just like a relatively established pub or bar, yeah, like 100% it'd be £7 or something.
Ours is like
£6,
yeah.
and a minimum, right? A minimum £6 for a pint. So then I just changed it and thought, right, okay, firstly, there's actually a small price in today's economy, and secondly, the value that I know I'm providing for that is disproportionately better than the actual.
Right.
Now, it only matters if someone agrees with that. I can think whatever about it. It matters if someone buying that then establishes the value to be good. If someone thinks something is expensive, it's expensive, no matter what that is. But if someone thinks something's cheap, on the flip side, then it's cheap. Even if that's £1 million a week, if someone perceives it to be valuable, then it's valuable. That's the only thing that actually matters. And that's actually a framework of thought that I think is important to get into when you're selling something. Is it valuable? Don't just have this arbitrary term of expensive. What does that mean? Well, it's going to be completely different to someone that's 15 and doesn't have a job, to someone that's 34 and is in the peak of their earning career. So yeah, that's where I'm at with Patreon so far.
Exciting, man. I'm glad you're on board, because I think it's nice because we're actually starting this journey pretty much at exactly the same time. So we can definitely draw comparisons, because obviously we are in the MMA niche together. You're obviously broadening your horizons in that regard, more of like a lifestyle brand now, right? But equally, we both have that creator mindset and philosophy. We share a lot of, similar traits. So it'll be nice to compare and contrast our experiences and, obviously inevitable pains that will come with doing something like that, because this is new for both of us. So that's going to be an interesting thing to dissect over the coming, let's say year for now, because the reality is with Patreon, it's more of a slow burn kind of thing. It's something you have to build up over time and gain trust with your audience. And so you provide that value and they can see that, and then the number will gradually grow and grow and grow. But it's exciting. For me as well, the same thing, looking at how I can provide value. And again, what we spoke about that in terms of potential pitfall is how can we, manage the time constraints it's gonna take out on us, because in providing value, you have to spend extra time, right? Generally speaking. And there are exceptions to that rule, but if you're doing something for a higher tier, for example, you're gonna have to do that, right? So when I was looking at maybe doing a $10 tier, I'm thinking about maybe doing some reaction content, talking head stuff, which is a bit different to what I usually do, but it's exclusive, it's off platform, and it's a nice change of pace, which can innately provide some appeal to like a passionate fan base or core audience. So that's an avenue I'm looking at, and of course, looking higher to the higher tier creator side of things, what I can provide as a creator in terms of what I've learned, my knowledge, particularly in the realm of script writing, editing philosophies, thumbnail design, and psychology, loads of areas in that regard that I know I'm going to back myself and say an expert. Why not? Let's say it. I have experience here. So like, that's where I can provide value in that regard for the highest tier. So again, similar vein to you, just been trying to sort of iron that out, figure out what I can provide, where I don't want to overstretch myself too much. It's interesting. So we're not, again, still putting the pieces together, hopefully by the end of this month, as it coincides with my Francis Ngannou documentary, which I'm currently working on, which is getting out of hand and is way longer and way more difficult than I thought it was going to be. But progress is being made on it. It's a fun one.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with a few things that you said in regards to what you're offering, because that's what I did as well. I had to sit there and just list out, right, okay, what value can I actually bring to the table, and what value do I want to bring to the table, which isn't going to be too much of a time commitment. And I was looking at these things and just laying them out, and I was thinking, hold up, I can bring so much value to these different
even more
tiers.
for you.
100%. I thought about it in regards to my middle tier, right? What's something I always get asked about? Always get asked about fitness, always about workout routines, nutrition, recipes, things like that. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to have this tier called Tough, TUFF, right? Just tough, just because I like the word. And it was the ultimate food fighter is basically what this tier is called. So I've got 3 tiers. I've got casuals, I've got tough, and then I've got casual CEO. And the middle tier is a Q&A, right? So there's a Q&A to answer the questions, but then it's a lot more about my fitness and different workouts and different breakdowns, and then actual advice for people, or help and advice. And I thought, hold up, I'm a 10+ year professional in this game. Like, that's a tremendous resource to have for just like a small monthly occurring thing. And then adding the recipes to that. I always get asked about the recipes. So, okay, I can put all my recipes in that particular tier list, right? And then the CEO one, like you mentioned, is a little bit more of the business stuff, is a bit more of the consulting, it's a bit more of my brand stuff, where I've built not just my own brands, but helped build other people's brands to tens of millions of views and hundreds of thousands of followers, and then just start leveraging that out for a higher monthly tier. So yeah, it's going to be good slowly integrating that. And like we spoke about before, you said about the Francis ones coming up, so that's a good way for you to integrate it. Then I started thinking about all the things I do in regards to traveling And I thought, oh,
So
okay,
much,
this is
bro.
an easy way for me to, yeah, so
Now
easy.
you can understand
Because
why I was so
now
excited for
when,
you to take that step, because just you have about
yeah,
20,
yeah,
30 times more things and value and opportunities than me that you can provide because of the nature of your brand. And there's no shame in that.
yeah,
It's just the
yeah,
the seeds you planted in spreading yourself widely. It's actually worked in your favor massively in this regard. And there's no real right or
yeah,
wrong answer per
100%.
se, but just specific to Patreon, there's so many different routes you can go down that people are interested in because they care about you and your brand. So I know, I'm glad you can actually
Yeah, it
see when I
really,
was talking about
really
this.
is.
Yeah, so much.
No, I could always see it. Not to quite the extent that I have when I've put more time and emphasis into it. But it's even things like when I go to Shanghai next month or the month after, whenever it is, in August, end of August, for Lon's fight against Charles Johnson. Things
Mm,
like that, right? Early access to the video, easy. Then it's behind the scenes of UFC Fight Week, easy. Content that I
easy.
haven't used and content that doesn't go anywhere, and like behind just coaching tips. So okay, when I go and have a one-to-one with a coach and they're dropping like hella knowledge on me, start putting those behind there, right? That don't go anywhere else. So yeah, it is exciting, but I think that's a good place to probably round off for this week.
Yes, yeah, thank you. This has been the MMA Careers Podcast, episode number 106. It's been exciting, it's been insightful, and we will see you next week. Have a good one.